Blam! Love this. This is actually an edition that has 2 novels in it. I have been enjoying The Magic Mountain, which is super fun. I really see the influence that it had on Thomas Pynchon. And then the words that you're reading kind of like drift out of your focus because you've been whisked away into something that's just deeply personal and internal. I'm gonna be a negative Nancy. I had a DNF recently. Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and welcome to Off the Wall Novels. I have not posted in a very long time, so I'm excited to give you guys a bunch of updates on my life and specifically what I have been reading recently. But I'm going to try to do a slightly different format on the channel where I'm just talking into my webcam because it's a lot easier for me to just do a one-off video like this. Whereas, as much as I like to use my better camera and make a more cinematic video essay, that was not a very sustainable thing, and that became extremely obvious to me when I was in grad school at night and working full-time during the day, in education, no less, which is extremely exhausting. And I just kind of realized that I was making reading work for myself instead of something that I enjoyed. And as I would post more videos, anytime I'd start a new book, I'd literally open Google Docs and be taking pretty meticulous notes throughout, and wasn't really enjoying the experience as much as I used to when I would just read a book just for the fun of it. And that kind of put me at an impasse with what to do with this channel, because it has always been about novels. It's always been about trying to talk about not just what I think about a book, but what I think the book is trying to say, like an explication. And that just has not really been sustainable. That being said, I still do have more video essays like that in the pipeline, but I think I was putting too much pressure on myself to really produce every single video that I made and try to, make it super stylish and everything. And I'm going to just give myself permission to start posting videos more like this, where I'm just talking into the camera and not necessarily doing a deep dive on every single book that I read, because I would be taking notes on some of these books and have, a good packet of paper full of notes on them, and then sometimes I wouldn't even finish them. And it felt like, oh, not only did I not enjoy that as a reader, but I'm not even going to end up using all of the work that I put into something that could have turned into a video script. So enough babbling about that. I am trying to change what I've been reading, and so to start out, I'll talk about manga, because I've gotten into some manga in the past year, which is not really something that I'd anticipated. I have never tried to poo-poo comic books or manga too much, but I was somebody that kind of knew about myself that they were difficult to get lost in. I would appreciate the pictures and the artwork, but I was not really following the story or anything, and I kind of appreciated having a couple old Spider-Man comic books. My favorite band, Coheed and Cambria, has their comics. I liked having them as a fan. I didn't actually like reading them. But I checked out some other stuff, and the big one that really grabbed me was recommended in a video essay on monumentality by the YouTuber Solar Sands, and I highly recommend anybody check out Solar Sands. I really appreciated it because he is really good at talking about visual art and art history, which are two things that I don't really have a lot of experience or even interest in, to be honest, but he does it in a very accessible way where he's talking about not only important artists and movements in art history, but also like contemporary internet art and everything in between. All of that is to say, blam. And I have had to look it up. It is pronounced blam, even though a lot of people call it blame. I'm not too much of a stickler for that, but that's just why I call it that. The Solar Sands essay was about monumentality, and it makes sense to include blam because the main character is wandering around this mega structure for the entirety of the manga. I'm 3 installments in. There's 3 more after that, and I think some spin-offs as well. But it's this enormous AI machine built. Oh, in fact, there's a builder right there. It's like a continuously built megastructure that the lead character is wandering around in. So the world building is really cool. And there are a lot of different mutants and different versions of humanity. Some of them have melded with machines. Others, it seems like they've had their genetics altered. But there's not a whole lot of explanation, which is really fun. In a book like this, they just throw in additional world elements as you go that you didn't necessarily see before, and it builds the world that way rather than, giving an exhaustive, like, descriptive breakdown of what everything means, what the rules are. And so that is really appealing. The artwork is obviously beautiful, and I'll try to flip to some of my favorite images in here. But typically, I'm not into something that is so world building heavy because it seems like it can often be a distraction from what the story is supposed to be about. But what I really like about Blam is that this main character is walking through this megastructure, and it seems like this world and the megastructure really highlights his loneliness and isolation as a character. A lot of the panels are just him in these like infinitely sprawling halls and these dilapidated stairs, and there are different levels to the megastructure, and people are in different states of squalor, depending on what level they're on. And he's looking for the net terminal gene, which off the top of my head, I don't even exactly remember how they described that, but maybe I'm reading too much into this, is that it seems like the story and the interest in Blam is him trying to find something essentially human, or this gene, in this megastructure. Now that I think about it, I think the net terminal gene actually has more to do with their connection to like the net, which makes sense because it's in the name. It's been a second since I've read this, so I probably am searching for a little bit of theme that might not necessarily be intentional in there, but that's okay. All of that is to say, really liked Blam. I recommend checking it out because if you've seen any of my past updates where I'm complaining about how long-winded postmodern literature can be and how some of the story elements are shirked in a bad way, I've been trying to read outside of those usual books and styles that I usually read, and I came across Blam and was like, oh yeah, I should like not only broaden my horizons in terms of style, but also just in medium, because I think I'd kind of thought that manga was not really for me, but I'm happy to say Blam really struck me. The other one that has really struck me is Berserk. So let me get that out. That's definitely a big honker. Okay. So Berserk is really cool and really not what I expected. My only complaint about it so far is that the installments are very expensive. So these are like $50 a piece. I bought 3 and I slowed down after that. I'm only on the second one right now. And I'd flipped through a copy of the first volume that my friend had, and I don't know if I just got the wrong impression of it, but when I first saw it, I thought it was way more like sci-fi and monsters, but a lot of this is like castles and mercenaries. But there are still some pretty strong supernatural elements. In the first one, it seems like they jump around in time, and it's like very heavy on the supernatural stuff, but then by number 2, it kind of gets into the main character's backstory and how he joined this group of mercenaries, and he's very good with a sword, killing all these people that other people would say need an entire army to slay. He's doing it just fine with his big old sword. So I've really enjoyed Berserk because it seems like the characters are also very well fleshed out very quickly, which is something that I think is really cool and really skilled, because it seems like a lot of the other books that I usually gravitate toward, there are these lengthy descriptions of the psychological interior of the character, or these kind of sophisticated and, again, lengthy ways of describing why this character has a certain psychological predisposition, or why they do this or that, or any number of different things, how they fit into society. Berserk seems to build its characters out of very simple, broad strokes in a good way. I know usually people use that in a bad way, but it seems like the choices end up just being very big and still very emotional and really ground you in the character's world. And that was a very refreshing thing for me because, like, again, I'm used to these kind of wordy, heady writers, and Berserk gives you really big characters that have a lot of depth very simply and quickly, which is something that I would like to try to emulate in my next novel that I'm working on. So in my interest in manga, it was impossible to avoid coming across Junji Ito, and I will actually say this is the one that disappointed me among all of the manga that I've tried so far, because I found that the artwork was really cool and really striking, and this idea of like spirals taking over the town in Uzumaki, that seemed really cool, but then as I read it, it didn't seem like there was as much depth as what I found in Blam, or especially Berserk, which feels very deep. This just seemed to be like more than 500 pages of working spirals into different imagery and scenery. And sometimes that was very creative. Like a lot of the panels in here are very horrifying and very strange. But I found kind of tired out about, or I was tired out about three-fourths of the way through and kind of stopped caring about where it was going. And then the end did not really justify it for me. So I don't know if I'm going to read any more Junji Ito. Maybe I should because he is extremely popular. But I was a little let down with this one, even though the artwork was very cool. So if it doesn't bother you as much that there's not this like perfectly, thematically aligned arc for every single character, you might still like it just for the art. Maybe there's more depth here that I'm just not seeing, but this one did not grab me quite as much as the other ones. That being said, I've also been reading some books that I would like to talk about. I think the best book that I have read and finished in recent memory is Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. I'm still considering doing a longer video essay just on Near to the Wild Heart because I've also started Agua Viva, which I might not finish because it's not as structured. It just seems like a lot of rumination. Still interesting though. But Near to the Wild Heart really grabbed me. It's very readable, and one of the descriptions of it I think is what made me end up buying it, because it said that it's not writing, it's witchcraft or something to that effect. And I definitely like supernatural kind of trippy stuff in fiction. And a description like that, I'm like, okay, I got to see what this is about. This seems pretty interesting. And I would say it's true. Like, I think a lot of what Clarice Lispector is known for is her just amazing psychedelic sensory descriptions. Like, you're reading this stuff and just the way that she describes what it feels like to feel something in your hand or to like feel the temperature of a room is really striking. All of that is to say the witchcraft element I think comes through the strongest when she's describing like her character's evil. And she sort of blurs opposites in this way of saying that like evil is something that can be holy and righteous. And she's not talking about just like negative feelings. She's talking about like evil. And it's not really projected at any one person or thing, and so maybe that's what makes it a little less concerning. But I don't know if her intention is to kind of go like the feminist route, where the sort of feminine ideal is that women are, well behaved and polite unto themselves, and she kind of relishes in depicting women who have like a dark side, and not a dark side because of like a traumatic past, but just because they're human and they want to like, express the full spectrum of emotions. And so that's a thing that I think I'm specifically inspired by, that I'm going to try to put in my character in the Kingdom of Liminal Space, this next novel that I'm working on. But beyond that, which is rather unique, like it seems like we don't always think of a novel as sitting down and trying to talk about like the benefits and the the good side of evil. But beyond that, like, yeah, her sensory descriptions are amazing. Other descriptions I've heard of her are that like you read the sentences and they seem to dissolve in front of your eyes. Like they appear very simple at first. It's not a tough read, but I found myself going back over it quite a bit because it would like kind of send me into different memories and different ruminations that I've had before. And sometimes when you're reading a book, that's a sign of getting distracted, but it seemed to be like part of the design of Near to the Wild Heart, that she'd be describing something, and then the words that you're reading kind of like drift out of your focus because you've been whisked away into something that's just deeply personal and internal. In addition to Near to the Wild Heart, I have been enjoying The Magic Mountain, which is super fun. Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, or Thomas Mann, who cares? And the biggest takeaway I've got from it so far is that I really see the influence that it had on Thomas Pynchon. And specifically, the way that Thomas Mann describes something like time, and a big theme in The Magic Mountain is that time is kind of malleable, and it's not just this grid that's going perfectly aligned with, whatever it's tracking, because I guess time is like a weird physics concept that might not even be real. It's kind of over my head. Don't take me as a scientific authority on anything like that. All of that is to say that it really reminds me of the way that Thomas Pynchon will take something that science has considered objective and kind of warp it in his prose, or use it in order to describe something that's intangible. I feel like Pynchon does that a lot, where he'll take very scientific measures to something very intangible, not only to kind of dismantle the scientific process, but to kind of give substance to something that doesn't have substance. So I really see the influence strongly in Pynchon from the Magic Mountain, and just the way that it's structured too. Like, a lot of the narrative action of the Magic Mountain is these like dialogues about life and philosophy, and I'm finding that I'm really relating to the main character because he is burned out after doing an engineering degree, and I would never do an engineering degree, but I did just finish my teaching degree and felt very burnt out by that, and so it's cool to read a character that I can identify with just in the situation, because if you're not familiar with the Magic Mountain, he, after getting burned out, he goes to visit his cousin Joachim up in the mountains in order to go to a sanatorium, and he ends up getting sick, but it's pretty clear from the way that it's written, his sickness is not only physical, that there might be something about the society that he was raised in that is sick, and there are a lot of really cool descriptions, but it's very subtly done too. My only complaint is that the pace is a little slow, and there's justification for it too, because he is playing with the malleability of time and how it's not certain, and how a lot of time can go by in a seemingly short period of time, and vice versa. And so he does pack in a ton of description into short periods of time in the book, and then we'll have a lot of time pass in just a paragraph or two. That's cool on like an idea level. As a reader, there are times where I'm like, okay, you can pick up the pace a little bit. It's dragging a little, but okay, let me move on from that one. I'm gonna be a negative Nancy. I had a DNF recently, The Memory Police, which I will say is very readable, but I'm finding that it just was not for me. The prose felt very tame. It was very matter of fact. And for a story that's about like authoritarian police coming in and dragging people out of their homes for having memories that they're not supposed to have, from things that were disappeared from the island, which I never got clarity on, like what the actual logic of the disappearances were, because things would be disappeared, but then people were required to go and get rid of the things that were disappeared, and some people remembered them and some people didn't. It didn't really come together for me, and for all of that, all of those elements, it just seemed boring. It seemed tame. Like, I thought there'd be a little bit more shock and awe of the memory police, like storming into people's houses and searching for things. Not for me. I probably could have finished it. I did enjoy it the first couple times I sat down to read it, but about 150 pages in, I was just like, can't be bothered. Oh, another thing about the memory police that I'm not crazy about is that the main character is a novelist, and more the novels she's writing, you are required to read as you read the book. This, in theory, I think can work, but sometimes when I read a book that has like a document that you have to read, especially if it's a novelist who's the main character, it almost seems like a little uncreative, that like, oh, you have this novelist writing a novel, and in it, the main character is a novelist who's writing a novel, and then you gotta like read it. That can work. That's in World According to Garp. I really liked seeing that for the first time in high school. Now when I'm reading it, anytime I had to like actually read the book that the novelist in the novel was writing, I was like, I don't care about this. It seemed like the framing of it within an actual novel just made me like, well, just give me a novel. Just give me this story. So I'll stop being a negative Nancy. Was not crazy about the memory police. I'm going to put this back over here. But in the Labyrinth by Alain Robbe-Grillet, probably saying his name wrong, loved this. This is actually an edition that has 2 novels in it. I don't know if I'm going to rush out and read Jealousy anytime soon, but In the Labyrinth really was fun to read and gave me some cool ideas for some stuff to experiment with for my next book. Alain Robbe-Grillet wrote Last Year at Marienbad, which is a film that I did a video essay on more than a year ago now, because it had influence on The Shining and took influence from The Invention of Morel. And I'm happy to say that Last Year at Marienbad, the film, is very similar to his writing style in The Labyrinth, because there's a lot of uncertainty about the reality. characters coming and going in impossible ways, the main character kind of questioning his sanity. But all of that is done in a very deliberate, maybe tiring style of Alain Robbe-Grillet paying more attention to objects and locations than characters. And this is by design. I haven't read like his manifesto about this, but I guess as a Nouveau Roman writer, he would do this where he thought that like a lot of the objects and environmental descriptions ended up creating a mood that actually created a better investigation of the character. I don't know if he would put it exactly like this. I'm probably putting too fine a point on it. All of that is to say, though, it really worked for me. The present tense and, exhaustive description of just what is happening in the room outside of what the character is doing really added to this uncertain world. There's a scene in the Labyrinth where they're describing the picture on the wall that the characters are looking at, and little by little the picture on the wall like starts to move and like becomes the scene that you're reading. Very postmodern move, very cool. Kind of like the permeability between images and the things that they represent, which is something that is done in a really beautiful, awesome, maximal way in Last Year at Marienbad, of having like a character standing in front of a statue and like slowly fading the statue and the film of the character at the same time as this main character is, in love with a woman, but then kind of realizing she might just be a projection or an image or a construction in his mind. I will leave it at that. 2 more books I'm going to talk about because they're big, so I saved them for the end. The Power Broker by Robert Caro. Wow, what a cool book. I'm only 329 pages in. And for a nonfiction book that is pretty densely written, Robert Caro does a really good job of giving it the shape of a narrative and some like themes that he must have picked up on just when researching Robert Moses, which is the guy who is the Power Broker. He developed a lot of New York, and the sort of narrative arc that I find really compelling about this is that he introduces Robert Moses as like an outsider at an Ivy League school and an idealist, and so he gets into politics in order to try to help the people build some parks, create better traffic flow and things like that. And then in order to get power, or maybe from getting power, he compromises his ideals to actually get stuff done. And so even though I have no plan to ever go into politics, it does resonate with me as an artist that you have all these lofty ideals and plans for the things that you're going to make. But then sometimes in order to make them real, you have to compromise on those ideals. Now, the way that he does it is through like dishonesty and screwing people over, including the people that he's trying to help. So I'm not planning on doing that anytime soon. But this is considered one of the best nonfiction books of the 20th century. And I don't know if I have enough gas in the tank to read all 1,000 pages of it, but I've gotten quite a bit out of the 300 pages that I've read so far. And am really liking it because it's just very different from what I'd usually read. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I think that is changing because the current read and my current obsession is The Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer. Wow. I was a little uncertain when I started this book because the prose is very simple, so I wasn't really sure what he was doing right away. And I started reading it because the Safdie brothers apparently were reading it when they made Good Time. And so if you like the Safdie brothers, or if you like that film Good Time, there are a lot of parallels because both are about somebody who's recently out of jail and then immediately get themselves back into trouble with the law. And I, always like tracking influences and seeing what books creators were making when they make a movie or a book of their own. So that's why I picked up The Executioner's Song. And as I've been reading it, I am just struck by how addicting it is. Like, I cannot put it down. That was the Dave Eggers blurb on the back, and he did the foreword too, where he's just like, this is the fastest 1,000-page novel you'll ever read. And I was like, all right, I mean, that maybe just from the perspective of a great mind like Dave Eggers, but I'm finding it very, very hard to put down because it is so simply written, but I think the sort of masterful writing comes in just how effortlessly he's drifting among all of these different characters without ever getting lost in his own writing style or too lengthy of descriptions. and he jumps around in time really fluidly in a way that I intend to try to work into my next book because, like I said, he's going for this kind of very traditional American dialect in the prose. Kind of turned me off at first, but I decided to invest in it further. And by the time he kind of lays some groundwork with the characters and the world that he's building, even though it is considered like a nonfiction book, or maybe like a nonfiction novel, it blurs the line because he's talking about an actual guy, Gary Gilmore, who ended up having a big influence on capital punishment in our country and his case and everything. I haven't really gotten to that part yet. They're just getting background on Gary and the people in his life after he's been released from jail. But once again, just like the scope that Norman Mailer is dealing with here is pretty enormous and so many characters, but it's done so simply that you almost forget that he's packing so much information so quickly into the book. Like no scene really takes too long. There's a little bit of variety, but it's pretty amazingly done, and it's kind of a cool digression from the sensibility that I've liked the most, which is the postmodern sensibility, which is very experimental, packing as many details as possible. Every single section might have a different style, not necessarily in every postmodern work, but that's a very typical thing. It's very maximal. This seems to be maximal in scope, but it's so readable and kind of like anti-prose in a lot of ways. Since he's channeling that American dialect, it doesn't seem like he's trying to make it literary. And so it kind of snuck up on me just how good it is. And like the true crime element to it made me question a little bit at the beginning and like, oh, is this just kind of like trashy TV? And that's my interest in it. And it's like, oh no, like he really does have like a pretty amazing mind in order to produce something like this, which is a shame because I've seen him and Gore Vidal arguing and him and Rip Torn fighting each other on set, and it seems like Norman Mailer was not a good guy at all. But guy can write a book, apparently, at least from what I've seen so far in the Executioner song. So that's kind of where I've been. This is a longer update, but I had fun just, kind of talking into the camera. So I'm going to try to make more videos like this just to take the pressure off myself of not having to make some big cinematic video essay for every single thing that I read. And I packed a ton of books into this video. So if you want to support me or the channel in any way, you can obviously buy my book, Lionel Lancet and the Right Vibe. I've got that right over here. If you don't have the money or you just don't want to buy my book, that's perfectly fine. You can listen to some of my music for free on streaming services. Spotify, Apple Music, everything in between. Ooh. And lastly, I am working on a video essay right now for the influence that V by Thomas Pynchon had on the film The Master. Okay, goodbye.